Bem, retomando os trabalhos e agradecendo mais uma vez a presença de todos, esse painel inicialmente foi imaginado ser feito totalmente em inglês com a tradução simultânea para quem assim desejasse. Mas, por sugestão do professor Caio, Dr. Caio, ele vai fazer a sua exposição em português e eu, então, não vejo também muito sentido que eu não use o mesmo vernáculo. Anyway, if you want to have any questions, I'm here to whatever is necessary. Então, eles vão falar em inglês, com tradução, o Caio vai falar em português, e assim nos comunicamos. Gostaria, então, a exemplo do que fiz em relação aos nossos convidados, do primeiro painel, de agradecer. Thank you very much, because you invited our invitation, you accepted our invitation promptly. It's an honor, and we are very glad that you're here. We need to face this comparison between our systems. We want to learn, and I'm sure that you'll be able to give us good lessons. And em suma, desde logo, segundo a combinação deles, a primeira exposição será feita por Mr. Burke, depois Mr. Allen Berkeley, e depois, então, o Caio fará a ponte entre os dois sistemas. Da mesma forma, depois voltamos a palavra a cada um dos expositores. Eles deram a sugestão de que nós reduzíssemos o tempo para 15 minutos de exposição, e com que esta presidência só pode concordar, porque 15 se transforma em 20, não 20 em 25. So the suggestion that you made were accepted, and so by the CEO, and we have 15 minutes. Please, Mr. Burke, you're the first. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Great. Oh, great. So very pleased to be here, very honored to be invited, and this is obviously a very important and very timely issue, the question of leniency agreements or cooperation agreements. There are many different names from the United States, but the way the U.S. has been doing it for some time has evolved over the course of years, and there have been more and more coordinated results, coordinated resolutions that have come out in the last several years, of course, including with Brazil and other countries, between the United States and Brazil and other countries. I thought what I would do for the 15 minutes I have, and I'll try to be as succinct as possible, is give you an overview, quick overview of how the U.S. process works. It's going to be necessarily very summary, because 15 minutes is not that long to describe the whole process, and also because one of the features of the U.S. system is there isn't a cookie-cutter way that all these things are done. One of the touchstones of the U.S. system is flexibility. Chaos. Alan is far, far less diplomatic than I am. So chaos or flexibility, basically the key point is that the way that resolutions are done in the United States, corporate resolutions, is very much up to the Department of Justice, the SEC, and the litigants or the companies that are settling. There's a lot of flexibility within that system. There aren't hard and fast legal requirements, for the most part, that restrict what can be done and what cannot be done, except in certain circumstances, which I'll discuss. So I'll try to do this as succinctly and as clearly as I can, but of course we'll have questions afterwards. So the U.S. system, there are a range of different types of resolutions that are possible for corporations. From the worst is a guilty plea, which actually is the one resolution that has a hard and fast rules that are set by law, by courts, and by existing precedent, all the way down to what's called a declination. And a declination is simply the Department of Justice or another law enforcement authority decides not to prosecute at all. And they inform you of that, and they tell you, we've investigated. At this time, we are not prosecuting you. That's the best thing you can hear if you're a corporation that's been under investigation. Across all of those issues, across all of those possibilities, or in between the declination and the guilty plea, is the non-prosecution agreement, deferred prosecution agreement. The difference between a non-prosecution agreement and a deferred prosecution agreement is the first one they say, we are not prosecuting you, but we could. And they say you have a certain amount of time potentially. Sometimes they put time, sometimes they don't, but it's kind of close to a declination. A deferred prosecution agreement is we would prosecute you, and we could have charged you with a crime, but we've decided not to. We've decided to defer it for a certain period of time, and you, corporation, you are a good corporation for that period of time, effectively you're on probation, and then we will then lift you out of the deferred prosecution agreement. All of those possibilities, from declination to guilty plea, all have the possibility of a financial penalty attached to them. It used to be the case that a declination was a real declination, meaning you're free to go. But now the DOJ has started, in some instances, to actually say, we'll give you a declination, but we still want you to disgorge certain profits or illegal benefits that we believe you got. And that has started in relatively recent years, but that also reflects the fact that there's no rule that says the DOJ can or cannot take a penalty from somebody that they decline to prosecute, a financial penalty. It's really up to, again, the DOJ and the company that's resolving the case. So the range of penalties can go across all types of resolutions, but the consequences to the penalties are very different. So the guilty plea, which is, again, the most structured, that is literally an acceptance. Well, if it's a plea, it's an acceptance of responsibility under the law of whatever federal statute has been violated. Usually, most cases that we're familiar with, it's the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA, but there are lots of other laws that corporations can be liable for, from money laundering to sanctions violations to securities fraud, what have you. So at the extreme, it's a guilty plea where it's like a person who pleads guilty. The company will go in and say, I did these things. I accept responsibility. You go before a judge. The judge hears your plea. The government has an agreement with you about what the plea means, and the judge will accept or reject the plea depending on whether or not you are showing sufficient acceptance of what you've done, so that clearly he can say that you have committed this crime and you're admitting to committing the crime. And then attached to that will be, usually for a corporation, a financial penalty. That is the most serious thing that a company can agree to, because guilty pleas, as you all know, will bring all kinds of consequences to a company that could be very serious. For example, for its debt, it may have limitations on its bonds, things like that. If a company admits to being a criminal, it can have very serious consequences. So companies try as hard as they possibly can not to plead guilty. 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was very, very rare to see a company plead guilty because of the example of Arthur Andersen. Arthur Andersen, as you all know, was one of the, I guess, the big five back then, or big six? Big six? I don't even know what happened to the other one. They're only big four now. The Arthur Andersen was Enron's auditor. They were charged with a crime of obstruction of justice based on an act of one of their senior executives. Eventually, the charge was thrown out, but the company went bankrupt, or went out of business, I should say, because it was charged with a crime. So the Arthur Andersen precedent or example led to fears at DOJ and in the federal government that if you charge a company with a crime, you can destroy it instantaneously. That has evolved over the years because DOJ started to periodically charge some pretty big companies with crimes and to see what would happen. And in most cases, those companies have not gone out of business. And that's partially because the market has kind of adjusted to the idea of companies committing crimes and taking responsibility and fixing their problems and moving on. So there's been an evolution towards more guilty pleas by companies, but it's still not the norm. And it's still the thing that companies try to resist the most. The most typical result for a company in a resolution is a deferred prosecution agreement, which is essentially a company doing everything, the same thing as pleading guilty, except it does not plead guilty. It says, I agree I did all these things, but the government has agreed not to charge me so long as I am a good corporate citizen for the next 3-5 years, whatever the agreement is. It depends on what you mean by a good corporate citizen, but as long as you don't commit any crimes, let's put it that way. So that's the most common feature. I'll explain a little bit about how the process works. How does a company get typically to a resolution in the United States? So what usually happens is that some issue comes to the attention of the U.S. government, to the DOJ. I'm focusing on the DOJ in particular, either through a whistleblower, through the news media, through their own investigation. They're investigating something else, and then they stumble upon some act by a corporate official. And either the government approaches the company through a subpoena or through a document request, or probably more common now is the company learns about some issue through their internal process or through an internal whistleblower. They go to their lawyers, they say, is this a serious problem, what should we do? And the company says, well, they make a calculus. If this comes out and I haven't told the government, am I better off or worse off? And usually the answer is you're worse off. So the government will, or the company will go to the government itself and will do what's called the self-report to the government and explain that we have found certain information, certain evidence that suggests the company has committed a crime or somebody at the company may have committed a crime, and we, the company, would like to investigate it ourselves and then provide information to you, government, based on what our investigation shows. So that's a key feature of the U.S. system. It's very controversial because what it says is that the companies typically have the opportunity to investigate themselves first and provide information to the U.S. government as a result of that investigation. It's not typical that the FBI raids companies in the United States, big companies, and does their own review of everything. That is the atypical situation. When that happens, that's really a really bad sign for the company. And if that happens, that often does lead to a quick demise for the company. When you see hedge funds or particularly financial institutions where that occurs, almost instantaneously they've lost all credibility in the market and they are destroyed. So the government bends over backwards to allow the companies to do their own investigation, meaning they hire their own law firm, they work with their internal compliance people to investigate the facts. And the contract, the agreement between the government and these lawyers is that the government will get the information that the lawyers are learning. Now, there's still privilege that applies. As you guys know, the attorney-client privilege in the United States is still pretty strong. But what the government or what the company is doing and what the lawyers are doing is they're letting that go a little bit so that they can then tell the government what their conclusions are. And the agreement there, again, is the company is cooperating voluntarily. It's spending money and time and effort on lawyers who will try to come to a factual conclusion about what happened. And the company is effectively saying, I will allow those lawyers to tell you, government, what they found so that we can try to have an amicable, as much as possible, resolution. So the process that typically happens is that the law firms will do an internal investigation. It can take anywhere from a couple months to several years, depending on the nature of the investigation, the nature of the issues. You can have everything from one person is accused of committing potentially insider trading or some relatively self-contained issue to a massive corruption scandal worldwide, which can take many years. For example, Walmart, which we're not involved in, has still gone on for years and years. So these can take forever. But the process that occurs is that in the period that you are investigating these issues, in the period that you are looking to all these facts, you are on a rolling basis giving information to the U.S. government, to the DOJ. And what you're giving them is emails, documents, anything that would be relevant to what you're seeing, things that are not privileged, like the email between the bad guy and the other bad guy where they said that they were going to pay off somebody, for example. Right? You're going to start giving them that stuff so they understand what you're seeing. And you also are making presentations to them along the way, sometimes many dozens of presentations along the way, before you come to a final presentation, which again could either be 2 months later or it could be 5 years later. And at that point, you explain to the government, here's what we found, here's what we think happened, here are the laws we think may have been violated, or we don't think a law was violated. It all depends on what the facts show. At the end of that process, the DOJ, they have been taking information in. They may be doing their own investigation as they get information in, but typically, again, they're deferring principally to the law firms as they go ahead. But they're becoming very educated, so that by the end of that process, when you've had that final meeting after 5 years, Both the lawyers on the side of the government and the lawyers on the side of the company have a very clear and unified understanding of at least what the facts look like. And that's where things become, at the first 5 years, it can be a little bit difficult, but that's pretty cooperative, right? That's where the lawyers are trying to be, they have to be very neutral and fair to the process. They can't try to help the company out too much in the sense of like, they can't hide things, so that's a crime. But they also are lawyers, so they're not trying to screw the company over either, right? They're trying to be neutral arbiters. And so the government and the lawyers have a pretty good relationship at that point. And where it gets tough is when you get to the conclusion, and the lawyers will, if a good lawyer, will always say, look, maybe something went wrong, we fixed it, they spent X millions of dollars on this investigation, they've changed the people who've caused this, they've done all these things, you really should not hammer this company. You should, probably just let this company go and just say, this is a declination, right? And that's where the government says, we were thinking more like a guilty plea. That's what we were thinking. And so then that's the negotiation that happens after that point. And where typically it ends up is at the deferred prosecution end of things. Again, where there's an admission of liability, but no actual criminal liability is assessed against the company. And that process of negotiation can take a great deal of time. But one of the things that's really interesting about that process is that's where, as a lawyer working in the United States, you learn how flexible the system can be. And what I mean by that is not that the prosecutors are flexible, that they're willing to do anything you want, whatever. That's the opposite. They're very tough to deal with. But that there's nothing that requires them in particular to do any particular thing. So once you know that, and once you understand what their motivations are, and once you understand what they're looking to gain out of this prosecution, are they looking for information about other wrongdoers? Are they looking for the biggest headline? Are they looking for the biggest number they can get? Once you start figuring all that out, you can try to pull the levers as you would in any negotiation to say, look, I understand that what you really want, for example, you really want information about other bad people that this company dealt with. That's what you really want. Let me see if I can maximize that for you so I can get a benefit in other ways. I can get a benefit from not having to pay $1 billion fine. I can get a benefit from not having to plead guilty. I can get a benefit from not having a monitor. You try to find those ways to work with them so that you can come up with a process and a solution that's more tailored to what your client needs and what they want than just some cookie-cutter approach. And once you start doing that, once you start understanding what their motivations are, you can start playing with those motivations to say, look, I know you don't have to charge me with a crime. I also know you don't have to give me a deferred prosecution agreement. You can basically choose amongst these things because in the U.S., there's prosecutorial discretion is almost complete, absolute. There's almost no oversight of it unless they really badly abuse it in ways that are like racial discrimination, sex discrimination, things like that, maliciousness. So within that discretion, the beauty of it, the bad thing about it is that they have so much discretion. But the beauty of it is that they have discretion, and if you can convince them to do things they otherwise would not normally do, they can do it, and you can come to an agreement along those lines. And often what you want to do is you want to keep, and they want to keep it out of court, because a judge, you start bringing a judge into it, and the judge does get involved with the deferred prosecution agreement in the sense that they at least know it's there and they have to kind of preside over it in a sense. You can get to a non-pros or even declination sometimes because they really, it's so creative what you've agreed to with DOJ, they don't want a judge looking at it. They want to just say, look, that's a contract between the Department of Justice and this company, and that's it, and nobody can review it, and that's true. So if there's any, I don't know how much time I have left, let's see. I only have like a minute. So I'll conclude on this point, that the key issue, I think, the key thing to know about the U.S. process is that it is a very flexible one if you understand the motivations of the prosecutors and if you develop a relationship with them over the course of the work that allows you to understand those motivations, work with them, and come up with a solution that you think will work for your client and that also will work for them. So that I think segues into what we're talking about today, because one of the features of the U.S. system, and I think the U.S. is certainly was the pioneer in this, is that you haven't seen governments other than the United States, at least historically, doing cross-border deals with other countries. It's been the U.S. with Brazil, Switzerland, UK, whatever country. But you haven't seen Brazil and Switzerland and Angola do a deal. You haven't seen South Africa and Argentina and Korea do a deal. All those countries have done deals with the United States and have brought other countries in. And I think the reason why that's able to be done is because the U.S. system does not have a fixed process that has to be followed in every circumstance. So with that, I will turn it over to Alan.
Before I start, one question for Bill. Deferred prosecution agreements, have any of them now been withdrawn with the company ultimately prosecuted?
That has happened, but not with significant companies, because usually what usually happens is that there's a warning. The government, if you're ExxonMobil, or I'm not trying to call them out as, I don't know if they have a deferred prosecution, but like big company, you get a lot of warning, right? There's a lot of warning that's saying, hey, look, we don't think that you guys are complying here. We don't think that you are living up to the deal, and then you've got an opportunity to fix it. If you're a small company or a company that is kind of just a rogue company, then yeah, it has happened, but not to major companies. Not typical. There have been times where it's been threatened, it almost happened, but they usually pull back at the brink. Because actually, the worst case scenario for any company is deferred and then have to plead, because then that means that they're recidivists. Yes.
Well,
Financial institutions are in the purvey of the DOJ?
Yes. Financial institutions. Every U.S. company, doesn't matter what it is within the jurisdiction of the U.S. of the DOJ under the criminal laws. So the DOJ has exclusive authority to prosecute federal criminal law. So that would cover any company that's within its jurisdiction.
well, let me start first by thanking the Foundation for the invitation, thanking my friend Flavia Arshel for including me, and thanking all of you for putting up with English today. But you would get even greater thanks if you put up with my Portuguese, which is really non-existent. I wanted, instead of talking about the DOJ, where I rarely have any contact as a lawyer, I really want to talk about the Securities and Exchange Commission, where I have practiced for many, many years at this point, in dealing with what we call enforcement proceedings, which the staff of the commission, with the commission's authority, initiates and ultimately brings cases, or should I say rather, ultimately settles cases, which is the same as reaching one of these leniency agreements in many respects. The SEC settlement rate of cases is so overwhelming and staggering that you wonder what's really happening there and what the motivations are on both sides of the fence. Somewhere between 90 and 98% of SEC enforcement proceedings are resolved through settlements. Some number are not brought at all, declinations, but the vast, vast bulk of cases that the SEC initiates are result in a settlement between the parties. The process is very similar to what Bill described, but there's one major advantage in dealing with the SEC, and which is that it's a civil agency. It does not have criminal authority. It cannot send you to jail. It cannot do much beyond imposing penalties and requiring disgorgement, a term that Bill used, which is to say requiring that the company put money into a fund to be used to compensate those people who have been injured by the fraud that the company engaged in, or the deception in which it engaged in. I'd like to make 3 or 4 points today, and I'll expand on a number of them. The first one is, again, as Bill mentioned, is self-reporting. The SEC has taken, in its cases, the concept of self-reporting to a new and higher limit, which is to say that it regards a company. Now, we're only dealing with publicly held companies, so we don't have family companies that we would be dealing with, except in very rare circumstances where there's public debt. But the SEC's view is that a company that fails to self-report is in line for enhanced penalties not lowered penalties in an ultimate resolution. So there are benefits clearly to coming in and self-reporting. It's all designed to encourage that. But when that company sits there and engages in the kind of conversation we were talking about, should we report, shouldn't we report, there's this extra hammer on them, which is if you don't come in here and report, when this is all said and done, you're going to get an extra X amount of penalty, which is usually a financial penalty. The second point that I would make is that cooperation with the SEC in these investigations means giving up many of the kinds of protections that we have in any investigation, in any civil proceeding. And I'll flag a number of those in a moment. But when you engage in a settlement conversation with the staff, which may go on for an extended period of time, the staff will demand that many of the protections that you would normally have in a contested investigation are gone. Third is if you've self-reported, you don't think it's all that serious, or you think you can prevail, and you're being asked to give up many of these protections, why bother to cooperate? Why not simply say no? There's no requirement that you cooperate, so why are you doing it? Why are you giving up protection in order to hope that at some point way down the road you will have a lower penalty, or they may drop the case, or you'll sign some sort of cooperation agreement to be a good guy for 3 or 5 years? Why do you do that? And I'm going to lay out a number of items which I think we all see in settlement negotiations that don't immediately come to mind. What comes to mind is a lower penalty. What comes to mind is not being put out of business or something. There are lots of other reasons why companies settle, and that's why the vast bulk of the investigations result in settlements, because there are other and civil remedies available to the commission which it uses, which companies simply don't want to face. At the end of the day in all of this, I sit back and I wonder, and I think it may be a discussion for the first panel, is this all worthwhile? And is public policy and the public good really benefited from these settled, negotiated resolutions of what may very well, in many cases, is wrongdoing? Or would we be better off as a matter of public policy by having more litigated enforcement cases, maybe even more criminal cases that resulted in prosecution and, not deferred prosecution, but prosecution? And sometimes you do wonder in all of this whether it's a charade that we all go through in these settlement processes in order to get to a point where everybody goes home happy, including the government, including the SEC staff, because they've put another little notch on their cowboy gun, and whether we're really servicing and serving the public interest in all of this. So let me kind of flag a couple of things that I think are interesting. Why does the staff want to settle? Why do they encourage discussion and settlement? One, simple. They don't have the money, the staff, and the resources to investigate on their own all of the matters that come to their attention. And they get criticized frequently for not bringing enough cases and not being on top of companies and not being proactive. They don't have the money that's budgeted to them by the Treasury Department and the President in his budget. They don't have the staff. They don't have the resources to bring case after case after case. So they want people to come in and offer settlements, and they want to negotiate. They want to make their budget. They want to put statistics on the board. If you ever wanted to see something, just a little by your leave here, something really interesting. Look at what time of the year SEC settlements are most frequent. In case you don't know, the U.S. fiscal year for government agencies is September 30th. Just take a look at the number of cases that are resolved in August and September every year. Gee, I wonder why. Simple. They're making their statistics to satisfy their overseers, to satisfy Congress, and it's gone on that way for years and years and years. So you have that there. Then you have that they, in good conscience and good faith, the SEC staff and the SEC commissioners are very, very interested in promoting public policy. When they bring a case, and even in a settled case, they get newspaper publicity, they promote public policy, and they're interested in doing that. They want to do it. And that's the notch on the gun. They're very interested in maintaining their statistics. If you look at this current year's reports, you will see that there's a lot of criticism in the newspapers that the number of cases the SEC has brought or resolved this year is down. Why is that? Some of us might say that that's instructions from on high at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Some of us might say people are fighting harder and they're not resolving the cases as quickly as they had in the past. Some would say that the staff doesn't have the financial resources to push these cases along, and they don't have time and money and resources to move the cases along. So the numbers are down this year, which is interesting, and we'll see where we are on September 30th for the year. What does the client give up? It's always fascinated me. When they agree to enter into a significant settlement negotiation, let's think about what it is that the staff is demanding that the company, my client, does when they start the settlement process. Well, the first thing is, as Bill mentioned, we have to have an independent investigation. What does independent mean? That may mean that the company has to go out and hire new lawyers with whom it has never done business before and who agree that they will not take business from the company for some number of years after the matter is resolved, so that they are independent at the outset and they cannot be seen to be incurring favor for a later engagement. That's really quite typical. What else is it that you give up? Well, you certainly are going to make document production, as Bill mentioned, on a very accelerated basis. You're going to be turning documents over. Gee, what about the attorney-client privilege? Do we waive the privilege when we agree to engage in open and complete settlement negotiations? And maybe the answer is that we are being pressured to do so. So we have new lawyers who are coming in completely with no background whatsoever. They don't know the company. They don't know the people. We've got an independent board committee who have been instructed to not respond to management because, after all, management is under investigation. So the committee must remain pure and only get its information from appropriate sources and resources. What else do we give up when we begin this? Well, it's very common in defending these proceedings for me, as the lawyer who's been hired, to want to represent any number of individuals who are potential witnesses in the case. Why do I want to do that? Well, I want to get more money in legal fees, of course, that's first. But secondly, I want to do it because I want to know where other people are coming from. What do they have to say? Why are they being called in as witnesses? I want to interview them. So I would like to, in a perfect world, represent as many of these people who aren't conflicted as I possibly can. The government will also, the SEC will often say, you have a client, it's Mr. Jones, that's your client. You can't have anybody else. Well, that really hurts. hurts my children's tuition, it hurts a lot of things, but that really hurts. Then I go on to other things. How do I get around that? Well, often I have a client, and Bill has a client, and Kayo's got a client, and we enter into a joint defense agreement, which is an agreement among the lawyers with our client's consent that we will share information. As you might expect, the SEC does not like joint defense agreements. So they will, as part of their willingness to go along with our investigation, let us control the investigation for the time being, their position will be no joint defense agreements. And if there is one, there's hell to pay for it. We have this Fifth Amendment business. Do we agree that we won't assert the Fifth Amendment privileges against self-incrimination? Well, they can't make you waive your Fifth Amendment privilege, but gee, we often do suggest that we'd like to have you waive the Fifth Amendment privilege. Now, there is a process that we see further down the road that Bill, I suspect, sees more frequently than I do, another term I can throw out, called Queen for a Day. A Queen for a Day is where you bring your client into a prosecutor, and the agreement is that nothing that is said in that meeting on that day can be used against the client. So the idea is, my client's going to come in, my client may very well have some exposure. He or she will go in and will talk and talk and talk, but nothing said in that meeting can be used against the client. Whether something that's said at that meeting leads to some other information that the government learns elsewhere is a different matter. Right, so we have that. So we have all of these things, and I suspect I could expand this list for a bit, which really is giving up an awful lot in order to engage in cooperation and to get all of that credit that we think we're entitled to. So why cooperate? Well, there's the easy reasons and the other reasons, and that's where I really want to focus a couple of things. The easy reasons are lower penalty. That's good. We want to do that. We want to be able to get sometimes to accelerate resolution and get it over with. We have a number of good reasons to do it. The SEC has authority and settlement and authority that affects individuals as well as the company. So if there's an individual who's at risk in the investigation, it may very well be very useful to focus on that at this point. So why cooperate? Let me give you some ideas. One, do not underestimate the prospect of civil private class actions against your client company. A class action is a suit brought by lawyers who usually specialize in bringing these actions, seeking to recover millions and billions of dollars for their clients, and to share in the largesse that results from that process. And companies are absolutely petrified of class actions. They're expensive, you can lose, most get settled for significant amounts of money. We don't want our corporate client to be subjected to a class action. Interestingly, when one settles a case with the SEC, the long-standing tradition that we were talking about before is to settle without admitting or denying the allegations that the staff will make in reaching the settlement. If that provision that says this is without admitting or denying was not there, then this complaint filed in the settlement, the agreed upon complaint, would be admissible by the plaintiff's lawyers in the class action, and which means that the government, the SEC, everything I've told them is now in the plaintiff's lawsuit against my client. So obtaining a settlement without admitting or denying the allegations in the government's complaint is extraordinarily valuable. You start with that, and it's very important. Now, a number of judges, and particularly Judge Rakoff in New York, have found this to be a very unattractive proposition as a matter of law, and he has rejected some settlements because they contain, without admitting or denying, provisions in them. But he is still, out there alone crying about this at the moment, and it does not reflect the broad position of the judges who are then asked to approve a settlement. Don't underestimate the importance that one may have in having insurance coverage for a settlement. It makes a difference if some of the costs of the investigation, some of the costs of bringing the matter to resolution can be covered by insurance, and particularly for insurance for corporate officers and directors who may be indemnified by the company, and this is a way to reduce the financial impact on the company. Don't underestimate the distraction of a long investigation that goes on for years and years, and how that affects the ability to run and manage the company and the client in doing it. So that's a significant reason to settle, frankly, is to get it over with. Don't underestimate the importance of which individuals are going to be named in the company settlement. Kaya used, and I were talking earlier, and used the term throwing someone under the bus. The idea here, frankly, is this, let's be very candid. Some senior executive in the company whose high-profile, important person does not want to be named in the proceeding that the SEC is going to bring. What's one way to, in a settlement, to have that person somehow not included in the negotiated resolution? I can do that by paying more money, maybe, saying to the government, well, instead of $1 million, I'll give you $4 million. I'm making the numbers up. I can do that also to talk about throwing someone under the bus by having some other corporate employee who has suddenly had the finger pointed at him or at her and say, you shouldn't be looking at me. You ought to be looking at so-and-so as the person who's liable and responsible and brought this on. All of those are things that come up in the course of these negotiations that can obviously be very difficult. And we're dealing with an agency that has been criticized for not naming individuals. We often say they want heads. They want people, individuals, who are named because the line goes, companies don't commit crimes, people commit crimes. So if we name a company without a person, we often have some difficulty in getting a settlement approved and getting bad publicity. So we're looking for people, and the SEC is looking for individuals, and certainly there are circumstances in which somebody may very well be thrown under the bus. And finally, let me just say that don't underestimate the pressure, the individual pressure on the significantly involved individuals who simply have a difficult time dealing with knowing the government is looking over their shoulders and looking at them, knowing that there's an investigation, and people simply want relief from the tension and the pressure. And I think often they learn to live with it, and certainly different kinds of personalities react differently to it. But in corporate circumstances, particularly if it's a heretofore uninvolved person, there's an awful lot of psychological pressure on the individual to get the matter behind them and get it over with. So I come back to my theme. We as the bar, we want predictability in these cases, and negotiation is a way to get it resolved and to get a measure of predictability. We don't like the idea of somebody poking around in our client and we don't know what's going on. So keeping that open door becomes extraordinarily valuable. Secondly, we have had a problem, and we can talk about this a little bit later, about piling on. You know, I settled with the SEC, and I've paid my money, and I've done everything, and all of a sudden the Department of Justice decides they want to look at it as well. There's been significant movement in the last year, 6 or 9 months, I guess it is now, that there's a movement against this kind of piling on, and one settlement ought to be it for all. And the other issue that comes up frequently is that big financial penalties hurt the wrong person. Big financial penalties hurt the company. Who owns the company? These are all public companies that we're dealing with. It's the shareholders. The shareholders didn't do anything wrong. Why are we hurting the shareholders by slapping a multi-million-dollar penalty on a corporate wrongdoer? And that leads back to getting some heads and getting some individual responsibility. But it is a major argument that we frequently engage in as we're conducting settlement negotiations, and frankly, an interesting one. I'll leave it there, and we can pick up some of this in discussion.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alan. Ok.
Bom, boa tarde, obrigado pelo convite. Eu decidi falar em português por 2 razões. A primeira é de que eu falo português, né? E a maioria das pessoas aqui também. Então, me pareceria ser inverter o rabo abanar o cachorro se eu falasse em inglês para uma maioria. E, em respeito a eles, eu passei todas as minhas anotações previamente para eles em inglês. Então, eles têm tudo que eu vou falar, eles já sabem. E tem na língua deles. Então, pela maioria, essa é a primeira razão. A segunda razão é que eu acho que o desafio não é em falar inglês, o desafio é falar em português mesmo. Português claro, que as questões jurídicas principais que afetam esse tipo de acordo de leniência são falsos problemas, e os problemas principais são de poder mesmo. E eu pretendo, então, em homenagem ao ex-presidente Fernando Henrique Cardoso, fazer uma análise dos acordos de leniência, uma perspectiva, sobretudo, sociológica, mais do que jurídica. E espero que ela contribua um pouco para a perspectiva jurídica também, porque uma coisa não se desconecta da outra. Antes de começar, um disclaimer, uma ressalva importante. Eu fui mencionado pelo Vladimir e pelo Bruno na condição de advogado, de alguns casos, mas não falo aqui na condição de advogado, não falo em nome de nenhum cliente. Comecei a trabalhar nessa área como resultado da minha atividade acadêmica e falo, então, na condição de acadêmico aqui. O que me dá mais liberdade também, porque daí nenhum cliente pode ser responsabilizado pelas loucuras que eu falar aqui nesse momento. Vou resumir o que eu tenho para falar, só para que todo mundo saiba. Então, 2 grandes diferenças e uma grande semelhança entre os sistemas americano e brasileiro. Em relação à prática da negociação desses acordos, as 2 grandes diferenças são o fato de que, no Brasil, a estrutura de capital das empresas é completamente diferente da estrutura de capital das empresas nos Estados Unidos. Não é uma razão jurídica, é uma razão prática. As empresas brasileiras não têm controle, na sua maioria, controle fragmentado, nem público. A maior parte das empresas são controladas por pessoas conhecidas, ativas no exercício do controle, que claramente determina a orientação dessas empresas. Isso, a meu ver, muda bastante a maneira como na prática, os acordos funcionam. A segunda grande diferença é que no Brasil nós temos, vou falar em inglês, mandatory prosecution, totalmente diferente dos Estados Unidos, em que a prosecution é não mandatória. Ou seja, no Brasil a ação penal é indisponível pelos procuradores. Isso significa que eles não têm a mesma flexibilidade que nos Estados Unidos é o requisito mais importante, segundo os 2 palestrantes anteriores falaram, para a prática desses acordos. Então, do ponto de vista prático, essas são as 2 diferenças fundamentais. Sem elas, a gente não entende. Eu vou detalhar qual é o impacto dessas 2. Além disso, há uma diferença institucional muito relevante, que, a meu ver, tem a ver não com o fato daquela multiplicidade institucional de que se falou antes, mas com um fato sociológico. ex-presidente, que é o seguinte: a Lava Jato não evidenciou corrupção só. Corrupção é a superfície da Lava Jato. A Lava Jato identificou um conjunto muito mais amplo de práticas estruturais, tal, que eu também vou detalhar em seguida o que caracteriza. Mas é a natureza singular dos fatos que gera aquele conjunto de dificuldades de caráter institucional anterior, e não o fato de que a lei prevê ou não prevê que determinado órgão tem ou não tem competência. Aliás, a grande consideração é de que, para entender Acordos de Leniência no Brasil, entender uma única lei é absolutamente despropositado. A lei 12.846, a lei anticorrupção, como se sabe, é um dos elementos, talvez nem o mais importante nessa brincadeira toda. Então, essas são as duas grandes diferenças. Uma diferença prática, uma diferença institucional decorrente da estrutura do mercado, da ausência de flexibilidade na disponibilidade das ações penais, e uma diferença institucional decorrente não de uma lei específica, mas da natureza dos fatos que se evidenciaram recentemente. A grande semelhança tem a ver com a finalidade do acordo, a meu ver também pouco compreendida em algumas das observações do painel anterior. A finalidade do acordo é, sobretudo, muito clara, obtenção de informações. Né? É para isso que serve. E serve para obter informações não em relação a quem está falando. O objetivo da obtenção de informações não é para que a gente ponha alguém para ajoelhar no milho. O objetivo não é moralista, né? O objetivo é outro. O objetivo é que se possa desbaratar uma determinada organização, um conjunto de práticas, que sem aquelas informações não seria desbaratado. Então, que alguém ajoelhe no milho é necessário, porém insuficiente para que isso aconteça. A segunda grande finalidade é que acabe aquela prática, né? Então, a primeira é que se obtenha informações. A segunda é que aquela própria pessoa que participa da prática cesse de cometer aqueles ilícitos e possa, eventualmente, se sujeitar até algumas medidas estruturais de reorganização. A venda do controle é uma delas, talvez está no mais extremo do espectro, mas não necessariamente é a única. Por exemplo, o monitoramento externo, independente, como tem um caso no Brasil com um brasileiro, 2 casos se você considerar que tem um americano também monitorando. É o caso da Embraer e é o caso da Odebrecht. O caso da Embraer é um monitor americano, o caso da Odebrecht é um monitoramento duplo, também uma novidade, um monitoramento por um americano e por um brasileiro. E eu vou dizer por que tem um monitoramento brasileiro também em seguida, tem a ver com a prática dessa negociação específica. A terceira finalidade do acordo é a preservação de ativos economicamente úteis, tá certo? Então, e todas essas vêm antes da quarta, que é a obtenção de dinheiro dessa própria empresa em razão dos ilícitos que ela própria cometeu. Lembrando que a fonte de reparação do dano dos ilícitos que aquela empresa cometeu não precisa necessariamente vir dela própria, podem vir de outras empresas que participaram com ela na organização. Então, se as 3 primeiras finalidades preponderam sobre essa quarta, e a meu ver preponderam, inclusive na prática americana, daí que eu disse que essa é uma semelhança, não há por que inverter a ordem e dizer que a última é que é mais importante do que as outras. Ainda no resumo, estou apenas no resumo do que eu vou falar. Houve uma... Mas como eu já disse quase tudo, há um elemento de maturidade institucional em relação a esse problema, a essa situação toda, que eu acho que foi pouco percebido, talvez porque as pessoas não estejam no dia a dia desse assunto como eu estou. Houve um amadurecimento institucional real no Brasil nesse assunto nos últimos tempos. Tudo que eu falar aqui que diga respeito a um caso específico ou outro, eu falo sem violação de sigilo, só falo com base em informações públicas. Então, é público que, recentemente, CGU, AGU, celebraram um acordo de leniência com a Odebrecht, que havia celebrado um acordo de leniência com o Ministério Público. É público que esse acordo é harmônico com os termos do acordo do MPF. Não há conflito entre esses 2 acordos. É público que há uma exceção expressa nesse acordo, a possibilidade de o TCU exercer sua competência para obter reparação de danos. desde que o faça respeitando a lógica mínima do acordo, que não pode usar as informações contra a própria empresa. Ou seja, há um paradigma a ser seguido de cooperação que não precisa de mudança legal, não precisa mudar a Constituição, não precisa mudar nada. Então, a possibilidade... Diga. É para mim?
Não.
A maturidade institucional hoje é diferente de 2 anos atrás, exatamente. Totalmente diferente. 2 anos atrás, a gente tinha um fortão do bairro, que era o Ministério Público, batendo em todo mundo, e era com ele que eu tinha que falar. Esse fortão do bairro ficou um fracote do bairro durante 2017, em razão, essa circunstância a gente não precisa detalhar todas, mas em razão de uma perda de legitimidade do órgão, a meu ver. Então, como eu disse, ex-presidente, eu faria uma análise mais sociológica. Fatores reais de poder fizeram com que um determinado órgão, que era aquele com quem se negociava, perdesse poder. Tão simples quanto isso. Então, o que se faz? Negocia-se com os outros que têm poder. Tá certo? Então, desde que haja uma harmonia entre eles, pode ser que o sistema saia beneficiado disso, como, de fato, nesse caso específico que eu mencionei, aconteceu. Pois bem, então, esse é o resumo da história. Vamos um pouquinho mais despacito. A estrutura de capital diferente das empresas brasileiras gera uma consequência prática muito grande de diferença entre os sistemas americano e brasileiro. Nos Estados Unidos, tipicamente, a investigação interna precede a realização do Acordo de Leniência. Por que ela precede a realização do Acordo de Leniência? Porque a empresa não se confunde com os seus executivos, nem com os seus controladores, necessariamente. O que não acontece no Brasil, em que a empresa se confunde estritamente com seus principais executivos e com seus controladores. Diante disso, ninguém faz uma investigação para descobrir um fato. Já se sabe qual é o fato, tá certo? Ninguém tem dúvida de qual é o fato. Se faz uma investigação depois para corroborar esse fato e apresentar provas que possam auxiliar uma investigação. Então, essa é uma primeira, para quem trabalha na área, é uma primeira distinção muito importante. Saiba que, no Brasil, as investigações vêm depois. Vêm depois por quê? Vêm depois porque a estrutura de capital é diferente. Aqui há controladores, e esses controladores são ativos, identificados, conhecidos, e tipicamente uma família. Essa é a razão. Pois bem, mesmo isso já está sendo objeto de alteração no Brasil. Para quem acompanha estritamente, o caso da JF, por exemplo, já demonstra uma leve transformação. Em determinado momento, o acordo da JF teve seus efeitos suspensos. Por que teve seus efeitos suspensos? Porque há uma cláusula nesse acordo, aliás, que é o oposto da cláusula que tem no acordo de Debrecht, que diz que as colaborações dos executivos e acionistas no acordo da JF andam juntas com o acordo de leniência. Se cai um, pode cair o outro. Pois bem, isso seria uma demonstração da lógica anterior. Ocorre que, ou seja, de que a empresa e indivíduos que são seus acionistas e principais executivos andam juntos. Mas, de repente, não mais do que de repente, o juiz que cuida da leniência resolveu voltar aos efeitos do acordo da empresa sem voltar aos efeitos do acordo dos indivíduos. Por que isso? Um amadurecimento da prática brasileira. Se verificou que a investigação que a própria empresa pode fazer pode ter uma utilidade pública, inclusive de ir contrariamente aos seus próprios controladores. A investigação interna que esse grupo empresarial hoje é obrigado a fazer pode eventualmente revelar fatos contrários ao interesse dos seus controladores. E isso demonstra o quê? A utilidade pública da preservação desse acordo da empresa por oposição ou em comparação aos acordos dos colaboradores, que um dia pode ter também seus efeitos retornados por outras razões. Mas o fato é que houve uma distinção já, nesse caso específico, entre empresa e colaboradores. Ou seja, é como se a gente estivesse passando já por estágio de desenvolvimento desse instrumento da leniência no Brasil. Nos Estados Unidos também, só para lembrar, foi assim no início. Tem na história do FCPA, inicialmente, empresas e indivíduos o DOJ tratava com uma certa conjunção. Hoje em dia não trata mais na expressão que o Alan usou e que é correta na minha experiência. O DOJ gosta de throw the individuals under the bus. E aqui no Brasil não dá para fazer isso. As pessoas andam de mãos dadas com a empresa. Então, primeira distinção. Segunda, por que pergunta que foi feita no painel anterior, que tem uma resposta objetiva. Por que é que um acordo que é feito com uma empresa e, portanto, não tem natureza criminal, é homologado por um juiz criminal? Tem uma resposta objetiva a essa pergunta. Porque ele tem efeitos criminais também. E quais são os efeitos criminais que são homologados pelo juízo criminal? São os efeitos de, como a gente chama lá, tem um umbrella effect, o Acordo de Leniência. Qual é o guarda-chuva? É o guarda-chuva dos funcionários de segundo escalão ganham imunidade criminal e civil, em razão do Acordo de Leniência. Então, na prática brasileira, os executivos mais altos, os acionistas mais altos que participaram dos atos ilícitos têm que fazer acordos de colaboração próprios. Não foi assim no caso do primeiro caso, que foi o caso da Camargo, mas houve um amadurecimento dessa prática por parte das próprias autoridades, que chegaram à conclusão de que não dava para estender uma imunidade para todos os funcionários da empresa, inclusive os principais executivos. Então, se fez uma distinção. Executivos de segundo escalão ganham imunidade desde que venham à frente e confirmem que participaram ou não daqueles fatos. Em relação aos executivos principais, eles têm que fazer acordos de colaboração próprios. Isso gera, em razão da pouca flexibilidade que os procuradores brasileiros têm para não fazer persecuções criminais, muitas dificuldades operacionais, porque nós estamos falando de muitas pessoas nesses fatos. Então, que um procurador brasileiro possa falar uma hora chega, também não me conta mais porque eu não quero mais, ele não pode fazer isso. Nos Estados Unidos pode. Não precisa me contar mais, eu já estou satisfeito. Isso seria importante para dar flexibilidade à prática, mas no Brasil não dá. Então, daí o fato de que há uma cláusula num contrato como esse que diz todo mundo que vier depois, que seja de baixo escalão, tem direito à imunidade criminal e civil. Antes de eu entrar no aspecto institucional, que é o mais interessante, só uma observação de que, na prática da Lava Jato brasileira, ocorreu uma coisa ultra interessante, que foi a liderança dos procuradores brasileiros no combate à corrupção regional. O DOJ ficou, na expressão que a gente usava, Bill, o DOJ ficou on the back seat. Não era isso? Foi uma estratégia específica, deliberada, adotada naquele caso específico, justamente para que uma negociação pudesse atender às peculiaridades da situação brasileira, o que nos levou, inclusive, a sugerir, naquele caso específico, que houvesse um monitor brasileiro, diferentemente do caso da Embraer, em que há um monitor americano, para que alguém que fosse prestar contas às autoridades brasileiras e estrangeiras tivesse, nas suas considerações, as peculiaridades da estrutura de capital brasileira, do funcionamento da economia brasileira, e por assim vai. Então, ali criou-se essa novidade. Pois bem, do ponto de vista institucional, vamos dar nome aos bois, né? Na literatura acadêmica, aquilo que a gente discutiu no principal painel chama-se multiplicidade institucional. É um nome bonito para essa zona que tem aí. Aí,
How can you translate this?
Institutional multiplicity is the nice name for the mess that we have here in Brazil. Então, do que decorre e qual é o problema com isso? Curiosamente, gente, a literatura não diz que isso é um problema. E não é mesmo um problema. Digamos que houvesse um órgão centralizado, sujeito ao governo federal, há 5 anos atrás, que tivesse o poder de fazer tudo que o Ministério Público fez. A pergunta é, existiria a Lava Jato ou não existiria a Lava Jato? Talvez não existisse. Então, a multiplicidade institucional é uma técnica de desenho institucional, uma técnica de institutional design presente no mundo, 40% dos países, na última estatística que eu vi, adotam, então não é maioria, mas é razoável o número, que adotam essa técnica, como sendo uma técnica de evitar que o sistema como um todo seja capturado. E por que essa técnica no Brasil fez sentido especificamente? A meu ver, ela decorre, de novo, de uma consideração de caráter sociológico. Uma coisa é corrupção, vamos chamar assim, convencional. Troca dinheiro por contrato público, certo? Corrupção como toma lá, dá cá. Outra coisa é o que se verificou na Lava Jato. A Lava Jato verificou, inclusive, que alguns contratos davam prejuízo, contratos que se obtinha com propina. O que explica que, numa prática de corrupção, o contrato que se pretende obter dê prejuízo. Tem que ter alguma outra explicação além do próprio ato, tá certo? E, a meu ver, a única coisa que explica, e explica muito bem, é que a corrupção era só um dos elementos de uma prática estrutural maior, pela qual o que se queria era estar à mesa do poder. Então, é possível até se dar o luxo de ter prejuízo no contrato, porque o que se deseja é estar à mesa do poder. Na minha caracterização da Lava Jato, então, em termos bem genéricos, é como se a gente tivesse um contrato relacional, é um termo jurídico, mas que é um contrato com escopo aberto, de prazo indefinido, entre dois grandes cartéis. Um cartel das empresas oligopolizadas e um cartel dos grandes partidos políticos, todos, sem exceção. Então, esses dois cartéis decidiram fazer um contrato entre eles. Esse é um contrato relacional existente há algum tempo, cujo principal objetivo é a perpetuação desse mesmo grupo, com o mínimo de alterações no poder. O objeto desse cartel era o cometimento de atos ilícitos? Nem sempre. É muito curioso. E hoje vários desses documentos são públicos nos registros da Lava Jato, então quem quiser checar pode ir lá. Verificam-se nas atas de reunião, por exemplo, entre empresários e políticos, vários temas que em si são lícitos. Ninguém pedia para um político ajudar a obter uma licença para abrir um cassino em Manaus. Não era esse o objeto da solicitação, era vamos fazer uma hidrelétrica, pode ser de interesse público. Então, é isso que eu estou querendo dizer. O objeto do ato não é necessariamente ilícito diretamente. Mas a minha pergunta é a seguinte: ao longo de 50 anos, 60 anos do funcionamento desse cartel, o conjunto de demandas populares vira só uma condescendência desse cartel, tá certo? Cartel que não é feito só de empresários, feito de políticos e empresários. É como se esse cartel fosse, a cada mini ato lícito, ainda que lícito, sequestrando o interesse público e, portanto, sequestrando o futuro do país. Diante dessa natureza de fatos, a pergunta é o que fazer do ponto de vista jurídico? Como é que alguém enfrenta isso? Daí que, num artigo na Ilustríssima que eu publiquei no ano passado, eu sugeri que a melhor comparação da Lava Jato não era com a Manipulite, que eu acho uma comparação batida. A melhor comparação era com Brown versus Board of Education, o caso judicial mais importante dos Estados Unidos no século XX. E eu não vou entrar em detalhes aqui, a gente não tem tempo. Mas eu recomendo que quem se interessar possa olhar lá. É uma situação em que a realidade é estruturalmente contrária ao direito estabelecido. A gente chegou à conclusão de que, apesar do que está escrito na Constituição, o nosso regime político não é democrático, é oligárquico. É isso que a Lava Jato evidenciou com material empírico farto. Então, a dúvida é o que fazer diante disso. Então, a resposta institucional, a meu ver, que foi dada por acaso, uma sorte, foi correta. Quem era a instituição que tinha os atributos institucionais para assumir a liderança desse processo? Se a gente estivesse pensando em teoria, então, academicamente, essa instituição seria dotada de 3 características. Ela teria competência ampla, penal e civil. Ela teria competência ampla para processar não apenas servidores públicos, mas políticos também, agentes políticos. Ela teria independência política. Ela não seria subordinada a um dos poderes políticos. 3, ela teria prerrogativa de iniciativa, ela pode fazer alguma coisa. E 4, ela está sujeita a controle de um outro órgão que tem as mesmas prerrogativas de independência. Não por coincidência, quem tem as 3 primeiras características é o Ministério Público Federal e quem tem a 4ª é o Judiciário. Então, na minha concepção, não é por acaso que, diante dessa realidade brasileira, o Ministério Público, junto com o Judiciário, agiu da maneira como agiu e utilizou como principal instrumento da sua ação os Acordos de Leniência, que nada mais são do que um tipo de regulação negociada. A gente já tinha chegado à conclusão de que a regulação típica não funciona, ninguém respeitava. Compliance, que é uma palavra também batida, era só para inglês ver. Muitos escritórios de advocacia, inclusive, vendiam o chamado kit compliance. Compra-se o kit e aí você passa a ser compliant. Pois bem, isso é evidente que é só uma farsa. Então, o que esses instrumentos de acordo de leniência permitiram? Que o compliance passasse a não ser para inglês ver. Nas empresas que são líderes do seu mercado, oligopolistas, há décadas. É impossível que a gente não consiga ver um avanço nisso que aconteceu. É óbvio que a gente também pode falar de críticas aqui, e a gente poderia, só meu tempo daqui a pouco acaba e eu não vou tratar disso. Mas então eu só queria deixar claro que, do ponto de vista dos atributos institucionais, a razão pela qual no Brasil há essa chamada multiplicidade é, inclusive, benigna, ou foi benigna, e foi exercida diante dessas circunstâncias que eu mencionei, com órgãos institucionais com os atributos que eu mencionei, e o que hoje há é um também benigno processo. Curiosamente, eu estou falando só de coisas positivas aqui, embora a gente esteja acostumado a só falar de coisas negativas, o fato é que aqui dá para falar de coisas positivas. Uma instituição com os atributos adequados usou um instrumento inovador para atingir fins corretos, cometeu alguns abusos no meio, esses abusos são objeto de discussão e devem ser objeto de discussão, mas essa zona, a MES que eu falei, ela foi, no caso recente do Odebrecht, objeto de uma harmonização, sem precisar mudar a lei, sem precisar mudar a Constituição, simplesmente por um fenômeno de caráter estritamente sociológico também, bem ao gosto do ex-presidente, que foi a emergência de uma burocracia racional no seio dos órgãos CGU e AGU. Um fenômeno weberiano, para dizer assim. Eu tive a oportunidade de presenciar isso. Era a minha expectativa de que, diante da vinculação política desses órgãos, esses acordos não fossem sair com eles jamais. Então, o que explica que tenham saído? E aqui eu posso apenas dar um testemunho, assim, prático. A burocracia desses órgãos resolveu assumir o seu papel de burocracia racional mesmo e criar escudos de proteção contra injunções políticas indevidas. De tal forma que um acordo, o primeiro verdadeiramente, que é politicamente sensível, possa ter sido celebrado por órgãos políticos, em harmonia com o Ministério Público Federal. O que vai acontecer no TCU, a gente pode discutir durante as perguntas, se vocês quiserem. Para terminar, eu queria mencionar um único ponto que eu chamo de o legado empresarial da Lava Jato. Um acordo de leniência, ele é uma equação, como qualquer contrato. Essa equação tem 2 lados. De um lado, você tem informação, dinheiro e medidas estruturais de reorganização da própria empresa. Do outro lado, você tem benefícios em troca dessa informação, dinheiro e medidas estruturais. Benefícios dos quais o principal é a sobrevivência da empresa, porque ninguém faz acordo para morrer, a não ser que seja maluco, o que não se pode presumir que ninguém seja, ainda que possa ser na prática. Então, mas o fato é que a lógica desses acordos é informação, dinheiro e medidas de reorganização em troca de benefícios, o principal dos quais é a própria sobrevivência. Se essa lógica não for respeitada por esses diversos órgãos, aí sim teremos um problema. E a única lógica que explica o não respeito a isso é a tentativa de desmerecer exatamente os efeitos que foram obtidos pelo seu uso. A segunda consideração principal é que esses acordos de leniência conseguiram impor capitalismo aos capitalistas no Brasil, pelo menos no setor específico de que se trata, que sempre professaram o capitalismo, mas nunca o praticaram. Você pode ser contra ou a favor do capitalismo mas o mínimo que você pode querer é que os próprios capitalistas se sujeitem a ele, tá certo? Então, esses acordos da Lava Jato conseguiram um feito quase inaudito e criaram uma situação que hoje é muito curiosa. As empresas que celebraram acordos de leniência estão em desvantagem competitiva em relação àquelas que não celebraram. Então, elas se tornaram, recentemente, vetores de transformação desses mercados. Poxa, se a gente não puder celebrar isso, eu não sei o que a gente pode celebrar. Obrigado.
Caio, muito obrigado. I'll give you the floor to a second round, just 5 minutes, something. We have 2 questions. Você perguntou tudo aquela hora da financial institutions?
If there is,
Yes, because you made a question.
you said that the financial institutions are in the jurisdiction of the DOJ. So my question is there any case?
Okay.
There has been any case?
I didn't hear if you complete the question. Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, has there been any case in the context of financial meltdown of 2007, 2008 of a financial institution who has done a lenience accord agreement with the DOJ, or none of that happened?
No, there have been. Are you specifically relating to the actual meltdown, or just generally speaking to leniency agreements?
Well, because the context is that there is this outcry in the U.S. that no one was punished.
Right.
Those who were responsible
Right.
for the fraudulent blah 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 and so on and so
Right.
forth.
No,
So-
there have not been, to my knowledge, although there are others who might know something differently. I do not believe there was a criminal resolution between a major bank and the United States government with respect to the meltdown, to the mortgage-backed securities,
Yeah, that kind of thing, yeah.
thing. There have been massive civil settlements with the DOJ, because the DOJ has both a criminal and a civil side. And there have been billions and billions and billions of dollars that have been paid by the banks to the U.S. government, both to the DOJ as well as to other agencies. In fact, out of full disclosure, my law firm represented the U.S. government in some of those cases. So there have been civil settlements that have occurred. Criminal ones, no. There haven't been, that I know of, any large institution that had a criminal resolution. There have been a handful
and
of people.
when they say punishment, they
Right.
have the criminal law in mind. I mean,
Well,
basically,
yeah. I mean, that's true. I mean, I think that some of these punishments have been very substantial, like $13-14 billion. I think that J.P. Morgan paid, and
but it's only money, right?
it's only money. There haven't been that many individuals. That was a common refrain, was that that no individual bankers, or very few, were held accountable. There were some who were tried, and actually some of them were acquitted by
No
a
one
jury.
was threw under the bus, right?
Well, there were people they tried to throw under the bus, but then juries got the bus. One of the biggest problems, the former U.S. attorney in Southern District of New York, a guy named Preet Bharara, who was very well known in the United States. He was the guy who was presiding over the U.S. Attorney's office that handled most of the cases that had to do with the financial meltdown, because it was Wall Street, and he was the U.S. attorney in Manhattan. So he was very aggressive. He was very well known. He was called the cop of Wall Street. He did all kinds of things. But one criticism that was leveled against him was that he didn't bring didn't put a lot of people in jail, like the head of Lehman and all these other places, for the meltdown. And his reaction to that was, look, I have to deal with the evidence that I have, right? I can't make evidence up. And one of the problems with the financial crisis, what I think a lot of people now recognize in retrospect, is it was hidden in plain sight, right? I mean, the issues that we're dealing with were not, most of the part, not fraud, not hidden underneath the table. They were in the massive prospectuses that were out there. And if you read through everything, you saw, oh, by the way, the whole thing might blow up and the whole economy may go down, right? It was there. And,
In minuscule language.
in minuscule
right?
language. But the point is that if you have disclosures and you have those things, and a lot of people know about it, it's hard to prosecute somebody criminally. So that was kind of his reaction to a lot of the criticism that he got, was that at the end of the day, the financial crisis was a systemic, all hands on deck kind of problem. It wasn't really a few people making fraudulent decisions that destroyed the economy.
Colega, devido ao precedente, sua pergunta era relacionada a esse ponto? Então vamos fazer o seguinte, se puder, então me manda por escrito aqui, tá bom?
Desculpa, eu quebrei o protocolo.
No problems. You created a precedent. Bill, okay. Please send me written. Okay. Bill, you want to complete something, or maybe
No.
Alan? Okay, Alan, you have the floor.
Yeah, I was only going to mention two resources that I didn't mention at the end that are available on the web and are very interesting in terms of process and procedure. And they are the U.S. Attorney's Manual, which is available at www.doj.gov. And it is the manual that guides the processes that U.S. attorneys are required to follow in conducting investigations. And it's an extraordinary document. And to go with it, only 20 years or so after, the SEC was embarrassed to the point that it created an enforcement manual called the SEC Enforcement Manual, available at www.sec.gov. They're sitting there, they're available, and they're terrific resources if you're ever involved in an investigation or you're looking for parallels of what the authority of an investigator may be.
Okay, can you give us a word, because they are asking about the destination of the fines in U.S.
Fines go to the U.S. Treasury, which then doesn't return them in equal proportion to the agency that brings the case, but it goes to the U.S. Treasury. The SEC has the authority to require disgorgement, in which case the funds go into the money goes into a fund which is administered either by an appointed trustee or by the SEC itself for the compensation of the individuals who have been harmed and damaged by the company's fraudulent conduct.
And in the criminal context, there's something called restitution, which, there's a concept called restitution in the criminal context, which is similar to disgorgement in the sense that it's designed to give back to the victims of a crime the monetary benefits that were obtained by the wrongdoer. So the idea, for example, if you are if you ripped off a bank and you've stolen $1 million from the bank, and the government recovers $800,000 because the rest of it was sold, what will typically happen is that they will then apportion the $800,000. Some amount will go back to the bank to compensate it for the loss, and then some of it will go to the government, to the Treasury, to compensate the government for the time and expense of doing the case. And that's becoming a more and more important aspect of a lot of these cases. There are major cases that DOJ has brought for billions and billions of dollars. There's a very well-known one now involving Malaysia, where they're seeking about $6 billion, and they say that the loss occurred to the Malaysian people. And what they're doing is, if they recover, then the vast majority of the money they recover is going to go, at least theoretically, to Malaysian people. Now, what does that mean? No one's really sure, but but they will deduct some aspect of their cost, but then most of it goes to the victims.
Anything? May I give the floor to? Okay.
May I just make a question to Bill? Can you explain to us the ability to pay defense that exists in the U.S.? Is that a consideration that they make for the actual situation of companies?
Yeah, so this is something that Caio and I, it's near and dear to our hearts, because Caio and I were heavily involved in the Odebrecht resolution. And Odebrecht, is part of its resolution, global resolution, with the United States, Brazil, and Switzerland, was that it would pay a fine that I think was roughly 10 billion reais, $2.5 billion, again, depending on I know that the currency fluctuates a lot, but back then it was about 2.5 billion US. The idea behind it was that the amount of wrongdoing that Odebrecht had admitted to was so significant that under U.S. rules, that how you figure out how to apportion the blame and how you come up with a fine. And remember, Odebrecht pled guilty, so it was on the far end of there was no declination of Odebrecht. It pled guilty to a crime. That it would have been $10 billion more dollars of fine that it would have had to pay. So if that amount of money was actually demanded of Odebrecht, Odebrecht would just go bankrupt, and that would be the end of it. And that would happen to a lot of companies. So what we introduced was a concept in the U.S. antitrust laws. In the antitrust enforcement, there's a concept of ability to pay, which is that basically the company, you have to look at a company's financial stability and whether or not it can pay a fine that would otherwise be required, or if you have to cut the fine effectively to allow the company to exist. And the underlying rationale of that, the philosophy behind that, is that a company like Odebrecht or a lot of companies has hundreds of thousands of employees. And if you wipe out that company, kind of like Arthur Andersen, because of the wrongdoing of a handful of people, that's not fair to all those people, all the families, all the employees, and everybody else who loses their job. So the U.S. In the Odebrecht case agreed to bring in the ability to pay concept, which was a very extensive process that Kyle and I were involved in, to demonstrate how much Odebrecht could pay without effectively being put out of business. And so that's what ultimately was agreed to, and that formed the basis of the overall settlement between the three countries. And it was actually very unique because although it was something borrowed from the U.S. had never used it in the FCPA context before. So we had to convince the U.S., hey, borrow this from the antitrust, the competition world, bring it in the FCPA world, and then we had to get the Brazilians and the Swiss to buy into this concept as well because they didn't have that concept. So ultimately, it worked. But again, this was an example of how the flexibility of the process can work to your advantage, because there we said to DOJ, let's borrow the ability to pay into this analysis. And there was no reason why they couldn't. They were allowed to do that, and they did.
A razão pela qual eu queria mencionar esse ponto é porque ele fez o fluxo contrário do que usualmente a gente está discutindo aqui. Foi o caso específico da Odebrecht que exigiu que as práticas americanas fossem alteradas, e não a gente simplesmente colonizado por eles aqui. Inclusive, houve um ganho conceitual para o mundo da aplicação dos acordos de leniência em razão... É o máximo. Então, para a gente é importante, né? O playbook do DOJ precisou ser alterado em razão desse caso, inclusive para a proteção dos indivíduos, que não aconteceu. Eu vou responder uma das perguntas.
E aí fica a última, a gente encerra.
E fica a última. Então, a alienação compulsória do controle não está prevista na legislação relativa aos acordos de leniência. Deveria estar prevista em que casos deveria ser aplicada. Então, na minha exposição, eu fiz uma observação de que há várias medidas estruturais que podem ser impostas a uma empresa nessa situação. Então, o monitoramento externo é uma delas, compromisso de atingimento de determinadas metas de compliance objetivamente definidas, por exemplo, obtenção de uma norma ISO, alienação compulsória num dos extremos, mas a consequência principal, se eu entendo corretamente, mesmo nos Estados Unidos, para alguém, por exemplo, que comete dono de uma empresa, que comete uma fraude ou um ato ilícito desses muito graves, é aquilo que a gente chamava em direito romano antigo de infâmia. O que é a infâmia? A infâmia o sujeito fica excluído do comércio, é isso que significa. Então, a minha resposta a você é: alienação compulsória, sim, pode ser, acho que deveria estar permitida expressamente na legislação, os casos deveriam ser bem restritos. Mas para você não achar que isso não ocorre no Brasil, como foi dito no painel anterior, eu diria que algo bem próximo ocorre. Como resultado da combinação entre os acordos de colaboração individuais e o acordo de leniência da empresa. Em vários acordos de colaboração individuais dos principais acionistas e executivos dessas empresas, há uma cláusula específica dizendo não pode agir mais na condição de executivo dessas empresas durante X anos. Esses X anos pode ser 10 anos, por exemplo. E isso é o equivalente à sanção de infâmia. E pode ser, eventualmente, mais interessante do que a alienação compulsória em alguns casos.
Lembrar que no PROE houve a alienação compulsória do controle.
Posso fazer uma pergunta? Se encerrar mesmo.
Brevíssima.
Muito breve.
Por favor.
So how
Quem
do
sou
you
eu?
avoid institutions How did the U.S. avoid institutional knockout? You said. How does the U.S. the system there avoids institutional knockouts, which is you have an agreement with one institution and then another institution comes and sue you.
You mean amongst government agencies?
Which is the content of the first panel and the debate we had between the two gentlemen.
Right.
And the last, if you can, did Sarbanes-Oxley give you less revenues as lawyers or more revenues?
The latter, much more. Much more. Yeah, because it had more requirements.
That's your question.
Anytime you add regulations, lawyers do better. So add more regulations, you do better.
What a
You
question.
don't even have to add the regulation. It's the fear of the regulation.
Right. Well, the way it works, I mean, there are different jurisdictions or different overlapping jurisdictions that are authority that various agencies have. So DOJ and the SEC have overlapping jurisdiction over public companies and, say, securities fraud. The SEC can do it civilly, and the DOJ can do it criminally. If neither side, theoretically, precludes the other from acting against the same target, so if the DOJ resolves a case criminally against the target, the SEC could still sue them. In fact, if the DOJ does it, they can't do a no admit, no deny. You got to admit it. That's the only way you can do a guilty plea in the U.S. So, but typically what happens is that they try to coordinate because there's not much incentive, right? If you're a big company and you're going to go get crushed by DOJ and then they're going to come in, it would be foolish. You go to both of them and you say, look, I want to try to work something out together, and then you work it out together. And there are the CFTC, there are a bunch of other IRS, I mean, there are a bunch of people or a bunch of agencies that are involved in this kind of stuff. DOJ tends to be in the middle of all of them because DOJ effectively acts as the lawyer for the federal government. So if you're dealing with the IRS, the CFTC, the SEC, usually there'll be some aspect that DOJ can touch on. So you'll try to bring everybody in that way. There's also separately, though, there's local and state prosecutors who don't have to listen to what the federal government says. So there have been many examples where state attorneys general and local prosecutors, DAs, district attorneys' offices, which are different than the federal prosecutors' offices, they will jump into a case. They'll have concurrently try a case. There are rules in the U.S. about double jeopardy, which are constitutional rules, but they're complicated, and there are ways to get around them if you're a clever enough prosecutor. But you can't really, the only way you can ensure that you don't get double banged is basically by having a general resolution with everybody. You got to get everybody around so that one person's not banging you, then another one's banging you, then another one's hitting you over the head. You got to have everybody in the same spot and say, look, this is what I can do, and you guys have to help me get to a resolution with all of you that makes everybody happy. So it's really, you got to be proactive.
Eu acho que essa última fala resume bem, né, uma das lições que a gente pode extrair para nós. Meu caro Sérgio, eu acho que cumprimos a missão de trazer à discussão questões das mais relevantes. Evidentemente, não chegamos a nenhuma solução, porque não é esse nem nossa possibilidade, nem nossa intenção, mas, particularmente como coordenador, além de ter aprendido muito, fico muito contente desta opção que juntos fizemos. Eu agradeço mais uma vez a oportunidade, agradeço também a oportunidade e a honra de ter sua presença, presidente Fernando Henrique, e, como presidente desta mesa, declaro encerrados os nossos trabalhos. Muito obrigado.